Everyone thinks they know Cleopatra, the seductive queen who used her beauty to control powerful men. But what if that entire story was a Roman lie? Because the real Cleopatra wasn't a temptress, she was a tactician, a woman so intelligent, so politically ruthless, that she nearly outsmarted the Roman Empire itself. While history painted her as a love-struck queen, she was actually running one of the most sophisticated intelligence and power networks of the ancient world. This was a ruler who spoke 9 languages, studied at the greatest library ever built, and turned Egypt's grain supply into a weapon that could starve Rome with a single order. She didn't win power with charm, she won it with strategy, timing, and absolute control. Over the next few minutes, you'll see how one woman manipulated 2 of Rome's greatest leaders, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, not for love, but for empire. You'll see how she built a political machine that threatened to split Rome in half and replace it with something far more dangerous, an Egyptian-led world power. So forget the Hollywood legend, forget the golden dresses, the romantic tragedies, the snakes and the scandals. This is the story of how Cleopatra almost conquered Rome, not with armies but with intellect, and it all started with a mind sharper than any Roman sword. The Cleopatra history forgot wasn't a temptress, she was a thinker. While others imagined her lounging in luxury, she was mastering languages, strategy, and science. She spoke 9 languages, when most Roman senators barely managed 1. She could debate Jewish scholars in Hebrew, trade with Syrians in Aramaic, and even speak to Egyptians in their own tongue, something no ruler in her dynasty had done for 300 years. Her ancestors ruled Egypt like outsiders. Cleopatra ruled it like she belonged. She studied at the Library of Alexandria, surrounded by the greatest minds of her time: math, astronomy, philosophy. She mastered them all and learned how to use knowledge as a weapon. When foreign diplomats arrived, they expected an interpreter. Instead, they met a queen who could outthink and outtalk them in their own language. Even her enemies admitted her words could bend men's decisions. Cleopatra didn't win power through beauty, she won it through brilliance. And soon that brilliance would give her control over the one thing Rome couldn't live without: food. Cleopatra didn't just rule Egypt, she ruled Rome's appetite. At the time, Egypt was the breadbasket of the Mediterranean. Its fertile Nile Valley produced enough grain to feed nearly 1/3 of Rome's population. Without Egyptian wheat, the world's most powerful empire would starve, and Cleopatra knew it. She turned food into leverage. Every shipment of grain that left Egypt needed her personal approval. That meant no Roman general, no senator, and not even Caesar himself could ignore her. If she said no, Rome's markets went empty, riots broke out, and the empire crumbled from hunger. Rome had the armies, Cleopatra had the bread, and in the ancient world, hunger was stronger than any sword. While other rulers begged Rome for protection, Cleopatra made Rome depend on her. She didn't just trade grain, she sold power, and once she had Rome's stomach in her hands, she was ready to take its heart, by outsmarting the most powerful man alive, Julius Caesar. When Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt in 48 BC, he thought he was coming to collect tribute from a desperate queen. Instead, he met someone who flipped the Roman playbook upside down. Caesar was in trouble, broke after civil war, surrounded by enemies, and desperate for allies. Cleopatra saw opportunity. She didn't beg for protection, she offered solutions. Egypt was rich, overflowing with gold, grain, and trade from Africa and Asia. Cleopatra didn't just give Caesar money, she made him realize he needed her. Her ships, her soldiers, her treasury, even her knowledge became weapons he couldn't win without. The famous carpet story wasn't romance, it was strategy. Sneaking into Caesar's palace wrapped in a rug wasn't about charm, it was a calculated display of intelligence and audacity. She showed Caesar that she could outthink his enemies and outmaneuver his guards. Soon, the conqueror of Rome became her partner. He used Egyptian gold to fund his campaigns, Egyptian science to fix Rome's calendar, and Egyptian legitimacy to rebuild his image. Cleopatra had done the impossible. She turned the most powerful man in the world into her ally. But when Caesar fell, she didn't crumble. She was already preparing her next move with another Roman giant. After Caesar's death, Rome tore itself apart. 3 men divided the empire: Octavian in the west, Lepidus in Africa, and Mark Antony in the east. Cleopatra saw what no one else did. This chaos was her opportunity. If she could make Antony depend on her, she could control half of Rome. Their legendary meeting wasn't some love story. It was a calculated performance. She sailed up the river on a golden barge, dressed as the goddess Aphrodite, surrounded by music and incense. Antony wasn't meeting a queen. He was meeting living power. Every detail was designed to overwhelm him. The wealth, the confidence, the symbolism. It all screamed one message: Egypt doesn't need Rome, Rome needs Egypt. And it worked. Antony fell under her influence, moving his political base to Alexandria, adopting Egyptian customs and aligning his future with hers. Together, they planned something no one had dared to imagine: a new empire in the East, ruled jointly by Antony and Cleopatra. But Cleopatra wasn't thinking short-term. Their children weren't just heirs. They were dynasty pieces, connecting Egyptian blood to Roman power. She was playing a long game, one that could have rewritten the map of the ancient world. If they succeeded, Rome would be split in two, and Cleopatra would rule the richer half. Cleopatra wasn't trying to destroy Rome, she was trying to absorb it. Through her alliances with Caesar and Antony, she built something far more dangerous than an army, a dynasty that blended Egyptian wealth with Roman power. Her son with Caesar, Caesarion, was seen by many as Caesar's true heir. Her children with Antony were heirs to the eastern provinces. If her plan worked, their descendants would rule both halves of the Roman world, all under Egyptian influence. This wasn't fantasy. Cleopatra was already building the foundation. She minted coins showing herself and Antony as equals, not as Rome's subordinate. She transformed Alexandria into a second capital, filled with scholars, artists, and diplomats who shaped culture across the Mediterranean. While Rome relied on brute force, Cleopatra relied on knowledge, economy, and vision. Her dream was an empire ruled not by legions but by intellect, an empire where Egypt's science, Greece's culture, and Rome's administration worked as one. For a moment it looked like she might succeed. The East was rich, united, and loyal, and if Cleopatra and Antony won their next war, Rome itself would fall under her shadow. For years, Cleopatra and Mark Antony ruled the East like gods, but in Rome, a storm was forming. Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, was calling them traitors. He played the Roman people like an audience, spreading stories that Cleopatra had bewitched Antony, that he'd abandoned Rome for a foreign queen. It worked. Public opinion turned, and war became inevitable. When Octavian's navy met Antony's at Actium, it wasn't just a battle. It was the end of an era. Antony's forces collapsed. Cleopatra's fleet tried to save what it could, but the dream of a new empire sank beneath the waves. Back in Alexandria, Cleopatra made one last attempt to negotiate, offering wealth, even her throne, to protect her children. But Octavian wanted one thing only: total victory. When Antony fell, Cleopatra realized the game was over. She wouldn't be paraded through Rome as a trophy. So she made a final choice, one that turned her defeat into legend. Her death wasn't surrender, it was control. She decided how her story would end, and in doing so, she took that power away from her conquerors. Octavian won the war, but Cleopatra won immortality. Her name outlived empires, her image shaped centuries of art and myth, and her legend became the blueprint for power itself. Even in death, she didn't vanish. She became the eternal question. What if the most powerful woman in history had actually won? Cleopatra's story didn't end in that marble tomb of Alexandria. It began there, as myth, as memory, as a warning. To anyone who underestimated the power of intelligence, beauty, and ambition combined. For centuries, history painted her as a seductress who brought down great men. But the truth is far more complex. Cleopatra didn't destroy empires, she challenged them. She used strategy, language, and psychology in ways that made her far more dangerous than any army. She was fluent in politics, in persuasion, and in power. At a time when women were expected to be silent, she made the world listen. Her legacy lived through every queen, ruler, and visionary who refused to accept her limits. From monarchs who redefined their nations to leaders who broke barriers, the echo of Cleopatra's voice still whispers through history. Power isn't given, it's taken. And though her empire fell, her story didn't fade, because some figures in history are too large to die. Cleopatra wasn't just the last pharaoh of Egypt. She was the first woman to make the world fear her mind.